The other thing is there's also an opportunity to raise your hand. So if you think for whatever reason you're not being responsive to answering the question, you can go ahead and raise your hand. So we do have a little bit of interactivity in that way. We of course also have this poll up. Feel free to answer it whenever you want. So for today, we've got two speakers. We've got Rich Fairbanks and we've got Chris Dunn, and I'm just going to really briefly speak about our speakers. So of course, Rich Fairbanks is from the Little Applegate. He's a long time been in the field of fire, both as a firefighter and a 32-year career within the Forest Service, 6 years with the Wilderness Society, and leading the California Fire Program. And he currently owns a small forest management company. He's got a long educational history in fire as well, with a degree in forestry, a master's degree in planning. And of course, he's a resident of the Applegate there with Terry Fairbanks. Our second speaker for today is going to be Chris Dunn, who is research faculty at the OSU College of Forestry. He's been with OSU since 2006, but he's formerly worked in the Applegate. So we've lost him to Corvallis, but at one point in time, he was down here with us. He also has a long and storied history being a firefighter, working in fire ecology, and now his primary area of interest is wildfire risk management. So two great speakers, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our first one. So let's go ahead and have you share the screen. I'm going to mute myself and put you in the spotlight, Rich.
Okay, is that working?
You're going to need to share the screen again, so that green button again. There you go. All right.
Got it?
Yep, and I'm going to mute
Okay,
myself.
all right. Anyway, what we're talking about is pods for the Applegate. And this is something that came up really after the Camp Fire, the fire that burned Paradise, California, and killed 85 people. Got several of my neighbors and me thinking about our evacuation routes, the roads that we use every day that are also going to be how we get out if there's a bad fire. Those roads are already being studied under what's called potential operational delineations. Scientists are already looking at and using various tools to analyze what roads are good egress and what roads are also good fire lines. And that's what the POD acronym is all about, okay? Even though it's a very sophisticated set of tools they are using, the outcome hopefully will be some brushing along certain roads and maybe building some turnouts and some other things that we can do to make these better. A public survey in 2011 indicated that over 95% of the respondents in the Applegate in District 9 have a defensible space around their home. A lot of people have also worked on fuel treatment on private roads. We got a lot of private roads in the Applegate. And for example, one of my neighbors organized a cut, pile, and burn project for our 1.5 miles or so of private road that serves 6 households. And we all split the cost. Some of us did some of the work. A lot of snag falling. We got a lot of bug kill, but when we got it burned up, it just looks really good, and it's obviously going to be less hairy thing if you had to evacuate out that road. So it really worked, and I think it looks good. So although we've done a lot of defensible space in the Applegate, a lot of people have cleared around their homes. Some people have cleared their entire 10 acres or whatever of, understory vegetation and so forth. Done a lot of good work. I think we all recognize that you get a day when the humidity is 6% and it's 105, and it's been 105 for a week, and it's windy, and you see a column of smoke, you're probably going to be thinking about evacuation. Oh, I sure am. In fact, I'm going to be checking into a hotel and calling my insurance. There could be that kind of conditions pretty easily in the Applegate. And on those days, people are going to want to get out. And that's really in certain circumstances, that's really going to be your rational choice, is to evacuate, to leave. And I think a lot of us look at the local roads and we ask ourselves, can Griffin Lane, Sterling Creek Road, Highway 38 handle a sudden influx of hundreds of people, scared people, trying to evacuate through smoke, sometimes flame? There's people who have evacuated who found later that their tires were on fire, that their paint was blistered. These things, these evacuations can get really hairy, and they unfortunately, they often result in tragedy. Again, referring to the campfire. And in addition to trying to get people out on a road like Sterling Creek Road or Highway 238, you've got a whole bunch of firefighters. If it's a bad fire, trying to get in, and they've got equipment and lowboys with dozers and busloads of firefighters and everything. So you've got just made for problems type traffic situation. The Paradise and the Cedar Fire earlier in Southern California also were fires that caught people in their vehicles. And I just think that's a terrible way for somebody to die. And especially, I don't mean to sound flippant, but especially a Californian with all the traffic jams they have down there. It's just not fair. So this is something that I think is real important. That again, on extreme weather days, we need to be able to get out of the Applegate. And again, we also need to consider what good fire lines roads are for certain kinds of roads. So I did get some advice from Mike McLaughlin, the District 9 fire chief, when I was developing this presentation. And he wanted to share some things about evacuation itself, on the day of the fire, what's what. The sheriff is responsible for evacuation. That's the webpage where you can find information. The homeowner is responsible to know their primary and secondary routes to get out. And again, Mike McLaughlin further advises that the way to do that, the way to identify primary and secondary, is be aware of weather and fuel conditions. And when there is a fire and you are deciding to go, look at the column, the smoke column, and go where it ain't. In other words, if you got a smoke column that's leaning toward the south, there's a north wind on it, and it's leaning to the south, then you want to go north generally. So this is, evacuation is pretty important subject. You should be ready to go and all of that. But this presentation is mostly about work we hope to do before critical fire weather arrives. We want to do fuels work before we have the critical fire weather. We want to remind you how evacuation works. And just to illustrate, this is the fire devil over West Reading, the fire tornado that developed over West Reading in the, I forget the name of this subdivision, but it's a brand new subdivision combining with Oxygen here. And when I was a kid, we had fire devils on fires, but they were like little 6 and 8 foot ones, chase you around for a minute and then they're gone. And we're now seeing fire tornadoes, fire devils, whatever you want to call them, that are 1/2 mile wide. And this is the kind of conditions that can sometimes develop when there's severe drought and combined with wind and ignitions. So, okay. So, since we're talking about roads that are not only egress roads, evacuation routes, they also serve as fire lines in many cases. And it's important that we be able to ask, is there adequate brushing of surface fuels along these roads? Are the ladder fuels pruned up to prevent torching out of trees and crowning out of trees? Is there a good line of sight so that crew lookouts can see spot fires before they get going? In other words, are these forests along the roads open enough? Is the fuel profile good enough so that they won't be a wall of flame along these roads, so that the fires will stay on the ground? And this can be really important. The fuels adjacent to certain roads can make a huge difference in wildfire outcomes. This is a bad road for evacuation and not a very good road for as a fire line. It hasn't been brushed. It's located at, you can't see this from the photo, but it's located at mid-slope for much of its length. It's quite narrow and it has no turnouts. I happen to have this photograph because we were walking cats that day. This road doesn't have any vehicle traffic on it, so the cats feel comfortable strolling around. But anyway, it's a classic example of a bad road. Some of us have been thinking about how to get fuel treatment and other work done along these critical routes because we know it needs to be done. We've known about roads' value as fire lines for a long time. Back in the 1970s, myself and many other fire technicians identified roads, trails, and even sometimes rocky ridges that could serve as fire lines. It was a process back in the 70s called pre-attack planning. We didn't have the software tools we have nowadays, but we had the experience of firefighters to tell us which roads best fit these parameters. These pre-attack blocks and pre-attack plans were common in the Northwest, but few of them got any funding for brushing, turnouts, any of that. Some roads, such as this one in the slide, this is in Hell's Canyon. And this road is just ready-made for stopping a fire, such as a fire that you can see burned from the right of the screen a few years ago. You can see the different color of the re-emerging grasses. That fire burned down to this road, which is perfect. It's on a valley bottom. It's a fairly flat valley bottom. It's a well-brushed, well-maintained road with turnouts. And indeed, they stopped this fire at that road, even though it was a going fire, by just a couple of engines. 7-8 miles of road, they were able to stop it with a couple of trucks with the water. And this was a Poe Cabin fire in, I forget, 2008, I think it was. But anyway, the point is, these roads really work. And the old pre-attack planning is now morphing into a much more sophisticated and I think much more credible way of analyzing which roads are good, called pods. A lot of us saw how fire could be stopped at a road. This happens to be the Lost Fire near Quartz Mountain Summit over there on the road toward Lakeview. And it's my very first firing boss job on a backfire. I'm the little guy on the right with the radio strap there. And this is actually a backfire. It's not the main fire. What's amazing is it worked. This little spur road we're standing on was enough, a little, 12-foot wide dirt road, but it was enough so our crews were able to light a backfire and stop the main fire. So this is a very effective technique, stopping it at a road. It needs to be a particular kind of road. And this goes for both roads that stop fires and roads that are good to get people out. Too much fuel, as on the left, and the vehicles can't use it. There's too much heat load along the road. On the right there, if the road is too rough, it's basically a four-wheel drive route, vehicles are going to get stuck. And so you got to have the right roads. Now, one thing that we've put some thought into is how we could get funding to help us get these roads brushed, get them analyzed, and get them brushed out and treated in various ways. And so to get funding from government and NGOs, We're working with this pods idea, the science behind it, and it is, to me, pretty amazing how much the science lines up with the common sense, which is often misnamed. But anyway, this is a map of Little Applegate running through the middle of the slide there, and the dots are fires we've had in the last 15 years, and the blue ones are lightning fires, and the red ones are human caused. And you folks know this country as well as I do. Cinnabar Ridge here, these lightning fires starting in these canyons up here, that a lot of that's 100 to 110% slope. It's so steep you can't stand up. That fire gets in there, we're going to have trouble. We're going to have trouble controlling it if it's extreme conditions. So we're thinking about how to finance some of this work. And, you know, some people are going to do this on their own if they, you know, if we suggest brushing back from a road, but a lot of people can't. And this is another map. This is an atlas of these potential control lines. You can see on the left side of the slide is Rouge there at the triangle of roads that are familiar to most of you. And at the very bottom of the slide, if you can see my pointer, there's Sterling Creek taking off. And what we're thinking about is I've highlighted Griffin Lane myself. That's my little red marker, just because from where it takes off from Sterling Creek to Medford, Griffin Lane is one of the best egress routes I've seen. Relatively flat, a lot of openings. We've even got one property owner who's willing to use his property as like a demonstration of how you would do this thinning along roads stuff. So this is something we really could do in our community. This is very feasible to do in our community. And one of the first things that a lot of the NGO and government agencies and such look at is, if they're going to do a project like this, they want willing private owners and a community that agrees, that has some consensus that fuel treatment is prudent, especially along roads. We're not talking about wilderness or anything like that. We're talking about doing treatment along established roads. It shouldn't be terribly controversial. And in other venues where the pod idea is being tried, ownership tends to be, the one I looked at anyway, tended to be public land. Roadside properties in the Little Applegate are mostly private. So that's going to be, again, we need a lot of support from the community. And what we want to propose fuel treatment that is effective, largely self-maintaining, visually pleasing along evacuation routes. And this is just a horse named Applejack pulling out some firewood logs. It's just one of the many ways you can modify fuels. And we think we can have safe evacuation routes that also make effective fire breaks and manage to look good doing it. I think this is, to me, a great example of roadside treatment that has reduced the surface fuel, 0 to 3 inch surface fuels, has increased the canopy base height. That's the height to the crown. So the surface fuels, fires burning in surface fuels are widely separated from crown fuels so that the fire has a lot of trouble torching and crowning. And I must say, I have a little bit of a personal agenda in addition to not wanting to be burned up and being able to safely evacuate. I also know that if we can get these roads brushed and maybe some turnouts and some other things, we will greatly improve our ability to manage not only wildfire, but to restore low severity fire. We can start restoring the kind of fire that's been here for millennia, maybe long, probably longer. And I believe this is the long-term solution to the destruction of property by wildfires. If we manage the fuels so that we have predominantly low severity fire, and we're reducing that ability of the fire to crown, and reducing its forward rate of spread, that we can restore our forests and also have a much lower risk for our human inhabitants. And I'm quoting our next speaker here. Dr. Dunn put it very well. Relative to high severity fire, low severity fire typically has benign or positive effects on ecosystem resilience, water quality, community smoke exposure, and responder smoke exposure. Low severity fires also inhibit fire occurrence, spread, and severity while enhancing containment opportunities. And to put that more in layman's terms, I have fought fire in areas where it had a low severity fire through it a few years before, sometimes many years before. And it was so easy to build line and to stop that fire because the previous fire had removed a lot of the fuel, especially the 0 to 1 inch, the fine fuels, and had left a lot of trees alive. So there was shade on the fuels, on the surface fuels. It's just an easier environment to work in if you're a firefighter, where you've already done some of this fuel management work. So we're hoping to continue and to get this pods thing off the ground for the Applegate. And the next steps are, we're going to meet with, we've already met with ODF. We'll meet with them again. Same with Fire District 9. We've talked to the Greater Applegate group. Well, I haven't talked to the BLM or the Forest Service yet, but we will. I'm hoping we can demonstrate a thin pile and burn prescription on 1 or 2 properties. We already got 1 volunteer. Of course, we couldn't do it because the virus, but anyway. It would be great if we could develop a list of property owners that are willing to have this kind of work done on their property. And we will develop a prescription, a set of prescriptions so that people can see ahead of time what's going to be done. Find an NGO partner, like one of the nonprofits, so that we could do grant proposals without having to go through all the rigmarole of getting to be a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And I'm really hoping we can get people interested, get people involved in getting all this done. If you're interested, I really hope you will email me. There at the bottom, richfairbanks3@gmail.com. And you can join the people that have already, John Gallego, Peggy Martin, Lydia Dolman. There's several people that live in our area that have already been tremendously helpful in getting this going. And I'm hoping we can find more people.
Hey, Rich, I have a question here for you.
Yeah.
From someone who joined a little bit late. They asked, like, what's the we that we're referring to? What's the organization? This group, is it an actual organization, or is it just a sort of loose collection of folks in the community?
It's a loose collection. I've been calling it Applegate Egress, just because that's in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to do, is better evacuation routes, better roadside management of fuels in the roads of the Applegate. And that's who we're aiming at. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And I do want to say, well, anyway, okay, to summarize, we have an opportunity to make our area safer, more fire resilient. We can do this using these software tools to identify the right time and place for treatment. When we get the treatments done, we can enter the treated areas into a program called WFDS. So when there is a wildfire, the firefighters will know which roads have been brushed out and where turnouts are and things like that. And we can do all this knowing that managing fuels along travelways has been done around here for centuries, perhaps millennia. The indigenous tribes of this area burned to keep their travelways open. That is something we know. That, I think, ends my part of the presentation. For a look at the science, we will turn to Dr. Dunn. Let me see if this works. Yes, okay. So through the miracle of modern technology, he joins us now from Corvallis to discuss the science behind pods.
Well, one second, Rich. I have another question here for you.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Before we turn over. So we have, there are a lot of workers in the Little Applegate that would not, there are a lot of workers in the Little Applegate that would not, I'm guessing not work as evacuation routes. Also, it's kind of hard to find some routes. Can we make routes? So I think what this question is can we actually establish some routes for people?
That's the idea. Yeah, they've already developed an atlas of roads that through various software tools, which will be described hopefully in the next few slides, how they decide which roads are best to use. And from what I've seen so far, it's really good. They're really doing they're using the science appropriately. Does that answer the question?
I think so. There's a follow-up question. Would it be possible to mark those roads with signs?
Yes, absolutely. And again, they're going to be, if we can get this done, they're going to be entered into a computer program that tells any firefighter coming into the area or supervisor of firefighters where those roads are, what has been done to brush them out, what the steepest part is, what the best flat part is, where the water sources are, where the hellespots are, all of that stuff should be in a computer so that firefighters can see it. And we can also publish, well, those maps I showed earlier, they've already shown, I didn't show the legend, but those different colored, they've colored the roads represent that, how, you know, they're good, bad, and different roads for evacuation. That's what they're doing.
Okay, well, that sounds like if Rich didn't answer your question, feel free to restate it. But barring that, let's go ahead and turn over to Chris. So Rich, okay. I'm gonna have you stop sharing your screen and have Chris unmute himself and start sharing his screen.
Did I do it?
Yep.
All right.
All right, Chris. So let's go ahead and share your screen.
Can you hear me well?
I can hear you pretty well.
Yep, we can hear you.
So thank you, Rich. That was really great. I wanted to sort of remind me when you were talking about roads and thinking about how firefighters think, and it reminded me of this slide that you see in front of you, and this one has always sort of, you know, impressed me, because here we have a cabin in the woods and you can see that they've done some work. This may not meet, you know, the full defensible space criteria that you often hear about, but you can see they've really created an environment for this firefighter to work, and here he is, in this case, capable of doing some burnouts and protecting this home ultimately from a wildfire. And it's really interesting when you know, think about the firefighter, good firefighter habitat, or good firefighter environment, how you can re-envision, you know, the landscape or properties and still maintain privacy and beauty. But this isn't really what I was asked to talk about. Oh, bear with me while I get this up. I'm going to give you, you know, sort of the science background, the details on some of the information or some of the tools you probably have heard about or are hearing about, or that Rich mentioned. Let me get it back up. So I'll do that real quick so that I can answer some questions. But there's 3 primary tools. One wasn't brought up, which is the quantitative wildfire risk assessment, which you can see sort of the methodology here in front of you. So you might hear this in the news, or you might hear this from some of your friends or some of the agency personnel around. And so I thought I'd bring it up just to inform you about what it is, and that way you can have good conversations with folks. But this is the general methodology, and what you see in the upper left is our maps, and is what that's intended to display, are stacks of maps of highly valued resources. They're called highly valued resources and assets because you see human habitation in communities, municipal watersheds, and on listed here. And there is one created for Oregon and Washington, and it actually has 28 different values integrated into that. And those are all spatially mapped. So we have their pretty precise location across broad landscapes, so we can identify where they're at and then make some judgment about how fire is going to impact them. And we do that by running a fire simulation model. It's called FSIM, or the Large Fire Simulator. And that model really is constrained on historical ignitions. So where have they been in the past? And then relationships between fire weather and the growth of wildfires. And so it'll randomly put ignitions across broad landscapes and then let them grow based on historical weather that was observed, and it'll just sort of randomly draw that. And then what you can do is get fire behavior estimates out of that, the likelihood of a fire occurring somewhere relative to somewhere else. And so you can get these sort of heat maps, hot and cold maps of where fire is likely to be. And then we can make some informed judgments with practitioners and resource specialists and community members on how various resources or assets respond to those. And that's what you see up here in this upper right corner. This is just an example. It's not reflecting any particular value. But what it's saying is that you have 6 classes of fire intensity that could occur on a piece of ground, and that a resource is going to respond differently to that increasing fire intensity. And so on the low end, in this case, fire intensity level 1, which is less than 2 foot flame length, so really a low intensity fire, it actually imparts some positive benefit on the resource. And that might be, this might be a fuels or vegetation layer, maybe some critical wildlife habitat, where you get some benefits out of that, what is essentially a prescribed burn. But as it increases in intensity and ultimately gets into what might be a crown fire, then you can see that it has really negative consequences on that resource. And by doing this, we can put all of these values and resources sort of on the same playing field so that they can be weighed and evaluated against each other. And then they are in this quantitative wildfire risk assessment. And then we can make some informed decisions based off that. But this just being an assessment really benefits from some way to operationalize that. And that's a lot of what Rich was talking about. And that's through potential control location atlases. And then we also use another tool called a suppression difficulty index. And what those latter 2 tools really do is bring forth that, the way firefighters and fire managers are looking at landscapes and engaging with landscapes. And so it gives everybody a peek into that world that may not have the experience of Rich or others as to how that operates in the background. And then we can map that, pre-plan based off of that, think about it in advance, and see where our place in the world resides in that broader context. And so when we generate the potential control location atlases, which are what form those pod boundaries that Rich was talking about. And so this is a way to evaluate across broad landscapes what features are likely to be useful for containing a large fire. Now, these are really large fires. It's not the smaller fires or the prescribed fires that you might see around the Applegate, but the big ones that Rich was talking about. And there's a list here that you can see of the factors that are embedded in this. And what we do is take a fire history. This is an example from the Tonto National Forest down in Arizona. And these are fire perimeters in yellow. And so what we do is we sample what it is around that perimeter that was useful to firefighters to actually contain that large fire. And once we understand that, we can predict that across the landscapes. And that's where you can get that atlas in and look at your landscape and say, this is, where I reside. These are the good control points if there's a large fire coming through. And then we can begin to pre-plan because we have that sense and we have those maps and we have that data available for us. And I'll show you, this is what it looks like around your area. This is in a GIS system, but this is the raw data layer that Rich was talking about. That's the full potential control location atlas. And of course, you notice as Rich was saying, it's not surprising. The big major roads in these valley systems are good control locations. And you can see then that's what's here in blue. And you can see how that spans out to the red, which are not good control locations. And we can start to look at these whole landscape areas and say, all right, where are they likely to contain fires? Where are potentially those good evacuation routes, as Rich talked about, to get us out in case that we need to. And that's what you see here in this map right now. And this is just an example. And of course, this is available anytime anybody ever wants it, and you can reach out and contact me. And then the last tool that we often do is this suppression difficulty index, which is essentially this basic firefighter perspective of how they're going to engage with a fire, which is, what is the fire behavior likely to be? And how easy is it for me to access that fire area, to be mobile on that fire area, and to do something about it? And this image depicted here on the right is from an actual fire event. You can see, of course, down in the flat valleys where it's easier to walk and work, and the fuel types are different than the upslope mountain regions. You can see it's in blue, which means it's easier to operate in. And it's, of course, closer to many of the road systems. And as you get up mid-slope where it's more challenging and steep, it turns more red. And these tools then are able to inform all sorts of pre-planning efforts as we look forward to a future that's likely going to have more wildfire in it. And with that, I'll just show you, just for fun, a series of slides of fire that was burning over outside of Summer Lake that you see up here in the top. Paisley, Oregon, the Mosquito Festival that's out there. So Eastern Oregon, Central Eastern Oregon. This is a Watson Creek fire, large fire burning on public and private timberlands. And so there's aggressive suppression effort. But this is just a series of progressions of this map or of this fire and how it unfolded over time. And you can see on the left, the potential control locations. On the right, suppression difficulty index. Some of this ground is fairly flat. It's got grass and sage fuels mixing into some lodgepole. And that was beetle killed in the higher reaches. But this is how the fire progressed and how they relate to these tools and how fire managers would ultimately end up using them. You know, just because one exists, let's say is a high potential control location, doesn't mean it's always going to work under every circumstance given the weather, but we can enhance that, and you'll see an area where they did to ensure that it could be a successful and useful control location. And here you see they're doing a burnout along one of these stronger control locations, and they'd actually pre-plan this, pre-prep this for the potential fire event. And then here's what that fire looked like and what that fire line looked like. So they were able to make it broader and wider because of the beetle kill, and then the firefighters were capable of using it even under a fairly extreme fire intensity here. So the fire's doing a short crown run as it's making this hook that you see in the broader map. And because they'd pre-planned that, it ultimately a successful control location. Now this is a pretty aggressive treatment because it's lodgepole pine forest and because there was a lot of beetle kill in here, and this is not what Rich is talking about doing, nor is it necessary in most forest types to go this extreme. But you can see that it does exist and it is reflected in the data as Rich was saying. And ultimately they were able to wrap this fire up.
Hey, Chris, I have a question here. I think further back on your original 3 slides, in particular the last couple, maybe at some point we can just go back to those and zoom in a little bit on some of the places that you're talking about, because it's a little small the way it is right now.
In here or in here?
Yeah. Can we zoom in a little bit on those maps so that people can sort of see what you were doing?
I can't zoom in on this because it's a PowerPoint. If we wanted to look at the Little Applegate, I can zoom in here. And this is a potential control location atlas. I don't know, let's look. The other pictures are just images. And that's really all the slides I have to share. So we're done with that portion of it. And we're just open to questions. So I can answer and show whatever maps you might want to see or discuss anything that you want. But here's Sterling Creek, and you can see it's picking up this road line through here in blue, where it's considered a high probability control location. And then on up Little Applegate Road here. And then as you move away from these road systems and get up into the upper slopes, the probability of those areas being as useful to controlling a large fire diminishes pretty significantly.
Chris, could you maybe wave your mouse over the areas in blue that you were talking about?
It's there, but I don't know if you guys can see it.
Oh, maybe.
So, I mean, you see Little Applegate Road coming down here? You see that arrow at all?
Nope, no, that arrow is not coming up.
Well, it's labeled Little Applegate Road, Stirring Creek, coming out here. For reference of where you're at on this. And we can take a little tour if we want.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
So Sterling Creek's got some, some of these broader spots. And when Rich was talking about going down Griffin Creek, it's got some strong points. He's absolutely right in his perceptions of seeing it in the field, how much stronger and wider a lot of these areas are and how useful for your evacuation routes or as a control location for the firefighters should it be necessary. It's not a place where they're going to actively try to make a fire larger, but in the event that something is really extreme and coming into the communities, we can see that.
So Chris, it might be that we're not seeing what you've got on your screen right now. I think we're only seeing the PowerPoint.
So the arc, that's a bummer. Well, I'm talking nonsense to you guys then. That's hilarious. Well,
so if you can bring the window of what you're showing into.
Yeah, I will. That's unfortunate that was the case, but here you go. Is this better?
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
Well, it must have been a real strange conversation I was having with myself.
There we go.
So,
apologies for the technical difficulties here, everyone.
I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out and give you the big picture, and then we can zoom back in as you want. And this is just the data portion. When we work with folks to draw pods or talk about actual control locations, we work with local fire managers so that we can integrate that local knowledge of people like Rich or those still on staff at the Forest Service or ODF. So Little Applegate Road coming down here. The broader view, if you want it, is here. So you have a good sense. So here's, of course, Medford and Ashland. And then in here, where we want to be a little bit closer. So there's, coming out of Roosh and then to Little Applegate and out Sterling Creek. This is what the model assesses as these good control locations. And then when we were talking about, Rich was talking about going down Griffin Creek and coming out into the main valley, and you can see it's a pretty strong control location, i.e. it's a decent fuel break that firefighters could use. And, in translation, that means it's also probably a good place where you could evacuate and move people out as necessary. And you can see areas that's much wider and much better than others. And so it narrows in points and then widens out in some of the more open valleys where the vegetation has been adjusted and moved.
Okay, so any further questions, any part of this map area that people would like to see in better detail, go ahead and either let us know through the question and answer or through the chat. That works as well. Yeah, any questions? So Rich, could I get you to get back on maybe and just talk to us again about what are the next steps for people who have called in?
Did you hear me?
Oh, nope, I had you on mute. There you go.
Okay, all right. So you can hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, the main thing is Um, we can do this using these software tools to identify the right time, the right place for treatment. We don't have to waste time making fuel breaks that are too wide or any of those mistakes, because we have these wonderful new tools. And we also know that this is something people have been doing for hundreds, probably thousands of years, doing low fire or fire surrogates to make their fuels more mellow along travelways, make them easier to deal with when there's a fire. And I think it's very important that people recognize this, that not only is modern science telling us to do this, but these ancient practices tell us to do this. And then if we need further encouragement, I don't mean to be morbid, but paradise. I mean, nobody wants that. And it was, to some extent, a function of people being unable to evacuate efficiently. And Applegate's got few enough people that we ought to be able to get out of there if we have to, quickly and efficiently, without having a bunch of people stuck behind a jackknifed horse trailer or whatever. And we can do that. We can organize this so that we've got a safer valley, and at the same time get us prepped for doing some restoration work. Because yeah, if you look at that, what's on screen right now, thank you, Chris, you read my mind. You can see that if you did do fuels work along these the blue areas, the ones that are really a good bet, you could then not only corral a wildfire pretty well, you could, it'd be sort of surrounded by feasible fuel break opportunities, fire line opportunities, but you could also greatly increase the efficiency and the acreage that you did control burns on. So again, it really is just a real common sense thing to get our transportation routes cleaned up, so to speak.
So, given the state of fire season right now, could you just go really quickly about what people can be doing on the ground?
Absolutely, and I forgot about that. Yeah, we talked a little bit about this. Fire season has been declared. I think it's like the second earliest or something like that. It is very early. It caught me by surprise, and it rained the next day, but they did the right thing. We've had some very low humidity. Apparently a lot of fires got away. People had piles getting away on them. So that's probably why they declared it early. Anyway, but you can still run a chainsaw. You can still run a weed whacker. And if past is prologue, you'll probably be able to for at least another month, maybe 5 or 6 weeks. Eventually they'll go to 1 o'clock shutdown. That's when you can only run the saw until 1. You can get a lot done in the cool of the morning. We should all be out there doing defensible space work on our properties, thin, prune, pile, get ready for fall when you can burn the stuff. And also, I hope some of you will be thinking about talking to your neighbors if you're on a private road, and I know a lot of you are. If you're on a private road, getting together with your neighbors, making a little pool of cash and labor and getting that road squared away so that it'll make a good egress. And I hope folks will support something on a larger scale, doing 238 and Griffin Lane, Sterling Creek, roads like that, so we can safely get out of here. But yeah, the fire season has been declared, so you can't burn, but you can do a heck of a lot of work to get your property safer, get your fuels managed.
So I have a question here. Megan says, I have a 10-yard dumpster on my property to throw all my clippings and prunings, etc. Do I need to get the leaves out of my vinca, which I'm assuming is going to be closer to the house?
Yeah, you should get your vinca out of there too. That stuff, I'm told it burns fairly well, and it is somewhat invasive in dry sites like we have around here. But yes, if you can rake it out, if it's near your house and rake it out, get those dry leaves out of it, you'd be smart. And I'd take a weed whacker to it if it were my place. I've never liked vinca. But anyway.
Any other questions from folks? And then Rich, can you just remind us again how to get in contact with you if they want to be involved in sort of the bigger picture of potentially getting together, getting funding together to get some of this work done?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from people at Rich Fairbanks 3 at gmail.com. Or you can call me up, not too early, 899-5272. That's the landline.
899-5272.
I'd love to hear from people, even if you just got a question or you think it's completely ridiculous or something like that. I'd love to hear from you. I really would like to see this move forward.
And I think the big thing is going to be to get more people involved too. Oh, and looks we have a raised hand. Okay, I'm going to try to see if we can get John to talk because he's got his hand raised here. John, let's see, unmute. No, I'm not sure this is going to allow us to do this. John, I don't think I can get you to talk. So if you want to, oh, can you speak?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. What I would like to do is to have more people come and see what a property looks like when it has been thinned to the point that you can introduce prescribed fire. Rich's property is a good example, and I think mine's would also be. So if folks are interested in touring a property, I would like to have them come and look at our land and see what we've done to create an environment where prescribed fire can be used.
Kara, can I say something?
Yeah, please do.
Oh, good. I'm not muted or anything. All right. I think that is a great idea. And John, the man who's speaking, is on Griffin Lane, where it is a really good, I think it's a really good egress. That road is a good way to get out of there if you need to. And he's got, I don't know, 600 to 800 feet of property along the road. And he's doing a great job getting the 0 to 1 inch surface fuels cleaned up, doing dead pruning and removing a lot of material. And aesthetically, it's quite beautiful. It would be great to do a tour with everybody 6 feet apart on that property. And I was very lucky. I got, an acre and a half done underburned. I'm to the point where I can underburn. Now, I've owned my property for a long time, and I've done a lot of work to get ready to do that. But I did about an acre and a half this spring, which ain't bad for a little guy my age. So, yeah, that's also, I would be happy to show people what that looks like, too.
I got another question for you too. What does a 0 to 1 inch fuel mean? And I think there was 0 to 1, yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, the fuel that's most available because it has abundant oxygen to burn is small fuels, pine needles, dead grass blades, things like that. And the way we measure it for various reasons is a 0 to 1 inch is the really flammable stuff. It's 0 to 1 inch in diameter. So it's any stick that's smaller than your thumb, or my thumb anyway. That stuff is what really fuels the flaming front. The thing that's going to eat your house is basically fueled by those 0 to 1 inch fuels. And by the way, there's basically 0 to 3 inch fuels are pretty much all the fuels that are involved in the flaming front of a wildfire. The big logs and stuff don't make any difference to the behavior of a wildfire. Sometimes they're even a sink. But yeah, the 0 to 1 inch are the scary stuff.
In diameter there.
Yeah, diameter, 0 to 1 inch in diameter. I should have said that. You're right. You get into the jargon. It's so easy. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. I'm gonna just give a big thanks to Rich and Chris for joining us here. Oh, I just wanted to say, my phone's about to die. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone and encourage you all to initiate conversations with your neighbors about how to be best prepared. Check out the great local examples of fuel reduction work, and hopefully we can get the broader community conversation going to help generate some funds and support for people to do the work. So this is a start, right? This is the beginning of this conversation. So definitely encourage everyone to go out and talk to the neighbors. This webinar will be made available, by the way, so you will be able to share it And we'll share that link with you afterwards. But yeah, I want to thank Rich and Chris for spending their Friday evenings with us here online. And I want to thank everyone for calling in.
And could I just add, I assume I'm unmuted. I am, okay. I want to thank Cara Baylog for her incredible technical expertise setting this all up, having this miraculous connection with Chris up in Corvallis, and all the week after she had a baby. This is definitely Superwoman. So I hope that's okay for me to say that. But thank you, Cara. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a good evening.
Okay, how do I turn this off?